Hello class, my name is Cassandra Franklin, and for my project I decided to focus on nonverbal cultural communication. So we have a few different topics that we're going to go over. We're going to talk about eye contact, we're going to talk about silence, we're going to talk about gestures, and then the difference between monochronic and polychronic time concepts. So let's go ahead and get started. So first we're going to talk about eye contact. So the thing about eye contact is that it often is a regulator for conversation. So when you're having a conversation with someone, typically, especially in America, you're going to kind of look them in the eye while you're speaking to them. And then when your turn is over, you'll usually look away or kind of look to the side, kind of indicating to them that you're done speaking and it's time for them to speak. And then eye contact also it regulates interpersonal distance. So if you're like in a crowded room looking for somebody, you make eye contact with them, that kind of says to them, hey, I see you. And it kind of closes that distance between you guys. It shows familiarity. But culturally, this can vary from culture to culture. And in some cultures, eye contact is very valued, but then in other cultures, it's considered disrespectful to show that much familiarity to someone or to have that close of an interpersonal distance with them. So in some cultures, making eye contact is considered disrespectful. Moving on from eye contact to silence. In America, we tend to not really place a high value on silence. We usually consider silence to be awkward. It makes us feel like things are uncertain if you're not just saying what's on your mind. But in other cultures, silence is really highly valued. It's considered to show thoughtfulness, and it also shows intelligence that you're willing to listen and not feel like you always have to be speaking. Moving on from silence, we can talk about gestures. So there's a few different types of gestures. There are emblems, illustrators, adapters, and regulators. And I'll kind of give you an example of each of those. Emblems are, a lot of times they're very universal. So like a wave. In most cultures, a wave is a way of greeting or saying goodbye. That doesn't really vary too much from culture to culture. It can. Illustrators are things like how some people talk with their hands. An example of this is, so I'm a preacher, and every time that I preach, somebody always makes a comment about how often I will talk with my hands. And I always say, well, I don't just talk with my hands, I talk with my whole body. I move around a lot when I'm preaching. And I always say, like, I'm just in the wrong culture because there are a lot of other cultures. I've spent some time in Latin American countries, and it's very common to talk with your entire body, not just with your mouth. So I'm preaching to the wrong culture sometimes. Adapters are things like how a lot of us will tap our feet when we're nervous. We might tap a pen on the table. I play with my hair a lot when I'm nervous. Those are adapters. And then regulators are symbols that will indicate something. So that's something to keep in mind culturally, because a lot of regulators that mean something to us in America, they might mean something completely different in another country. And an example is in America, when we do a thumbs up, that means like, hey, okay, you're good. That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing in all cultures though, and there are some cultures where it's actually offensive. So moving on from gestures, next we're going to spend some time talking about time concepts. So when we're talking about time concepts when it comes to culture, there's two different kinds. We have monochronic and we have polychronic. So monochronic is what we would consider to be an American time concept. We consider time to be linear, that one thing happens after another, before and after, and we don't really see time as something where things kind of mold together. We place a high emphasis on deadlines. An example of that is in our college classes. We have deadlines that we have to meet usually, and it's considered lazy or even inconsiderate for us to be late. If we submit late work, that usually affects our grade or has some kind of a consequence to us. In polychronic cultures, though, when it comes to their time concept, they consider time to be a more circular than linear. They place a higher value on personal relationships than task completion. And they usually consider that tasks are tied to relationships, so tasks are completed because of personal relationships, not in spite of. An example of this is I have a Puerto Rican friend who invited me to a birthday party a few months ago, and I said that the party was going to be at 4:30. So I showed up at 4:25 and sat around for a little while with her and her uncle, waiting for everyone else to show up. And after a while, she said, "Well, I asked everybody to be here at 4:30." And her uncle said, "Well, yes, but did you say 4:30 Puerto Rican time?" And so sure enough, about 5 o'clock, everybody showed up. And that's very common in Middle Eastern and Latin American countries, for there to be more of an emphasis on personal relationships than being somewhere at a specific time. So as a recap, so nonverbal communication, it varies from culture to culture. And some nonverbal communication is universal, but most of it is not. And for effective communication to take place, communicators really should take cultural differences into consideration. Thank you very much.